Where is the line drawn on who will and wouldn't be considered for a pardon?
I think it's very simple. Look, if you protested peacefully on January the 6th and you've had Merrick Garland's Department of Justice treat you like a gang member, you should be pardoned. If you committed violence on that day, obviously you shouldn't be pardoned. And there's a little bit of a gray area there, but we're very much committed to seeing the equal administration of law. And there are a lot of people, we think, in the wake of January the 6th who were prosecuted unfairly. We need to rectify that.
Now, that measured response by Trump's vice president, JD Vance, has led to a lot of backlash from some in the MAGA crowd. They're upset that there won't be a blanket pardon policy for January 6 rioters. Now, as of December 6th of 2024, 1,572 January 6 defendants have been federally charged for their involvement in storming the Capitol on that date. Now, of those, 996 pleaded guilty to felonies or misdemeanors, and 215 were found guilty after contested trials. Just under 600 were charged with assaulting, resisting, or impeding law enforcement. 174 were charged with entering a restricted area with a dangerous or deadly weapon, and 18 were charged with seditious conspiracy. Now, some of the rioters were convicted, but not all of them were sentenced to jail time. About 645 of them were convicted and jailed. And the most substantial jail sentences were in fact given for violent crimes or seditious conspiracy, and they range from 10 to 22 years in prison. Now, when Trump won his second term, there seemed to be this expectation within the MAGA crowd that he would implement a blanket pardon policy for anyone who was federally charged in the January 6 riots. But now it appears that that might not be the case. Now, Marjorie Taylor Greene last week told the Associated Press, quote, "Even the ones that fought Capitol Police caused damage to the Capitol, I think they've served their time and I think they should all be pardoned and released from prison." John Pierce, who happens to be a defense attorney for more than 50 of the January 6 defendants, told Reuters, "If he does not issue essentially a blanket pardon on day one, I think he will face a lot of backlash." And Trump, by the way, has made it seem like he would do a blanket pardon. Trump has made repeated promises to free the more than 460 participants who have been sentenced to periods of incarceration on his first day in office, calling them hostages and political prisoners. As recently as this past week at a press conference in Mar-a-Lago, Trump promised to issue major pardons when asked whether he would pardon those charged with violent offenses. Now, look, while Trump did state that he would look at things on a case-by-case basis during his New York Times interview, he did still say a vast majority of them should not be in jail. But now many in this MAGA movement have absolutely soured on JD Vance in particular for saying what he said on Fox News. So January 6 rioter Luke Lintz, who was sentenced to 4 months in prison and 32 months of parole for using a riot shield against police, posted this video.
"You expect us to believe that they stole the election, okay? Which is against the law. And then you want us to peacefully and patriotically go there. Okay, so we did. And then we get attacked by these stupid mother. And now you're not willing to stand with us after we went through 4 years of hell. And you want to make sure that, okay, we don't let the feds through and they don't get a pardon. Okay, all right. I want to make sure the innocent men and women who were locked up for doing nothing wrong get a pardon. That's what I want.
Others who were involved in the January 6 riots have also spoken up. I'll give you some more statements in just a minute. But Cenk, I think now is a good time to bring you in because I'm really curious what you think. I thought what JD Vance said was perfectly fine, because if you did carry out acts of violence, there should be punishment for that. But I do think that there were some people who, after the initial, running into the Capitol, breaking the barriers and all of that stuff, there were some people who just kind of wandered in and were walking around. I don't know if you should throw the book at those folks, but there are people who did carry out acts of violence on that day. And the idea of just pardoning them or issuing a blanket pardon, I think, goes too far. What do you think?
Yeah, I disagree with everyone involved in this story, but I do have empathy for one group, which I'll get to in a second. But also, Anna, another interesting part of the story is how they're releasing this news. Because when I saw JD Vance say that, I thought for sure that he had gotten permission from Trump to say it. Otherwise, he's going to run into trouble. And so it doesn't make any sense if he goes off the reservation to say that they will not pardon some of the January 6th guys when Trump has said it. So, but now what I think is maybe they were using it as a trial balloon. So where Susie Wiles or Trump or someone else says, hey, why don't we have JD go out there and say it and see how people react? And if they react poorly, we can pull it back. But it's harder to pull it back if Trump says it, right? And so they're trying to thread the needle here. Because remember, the rest of the Republican politicians hate the idea of letting the violent January 6th guys go because they came to kill them. I mean, Remember they were chanting, hang Mike Pence, and Mike Pence is not a Democrat. He was the Republican vice president. And by the way, JD, you keep this up, and the next chant might be hang JD Vance. So keep it real. So now, before we get to his flip-flop and his backpedaling, which might be part of the plan here, if it's a trial balloon, you see if it works, and then if it doesn't, you do backpedal, right? To the point about who's right and who's wrong, well, look, no, if you entered the Capitol, that was trespassing, obstruction of proceeding, which is a crime when it comes to Congress, et cetera. No, I don't think any of them should get a pardon. Now, on the other hand, they're the one group I empathize with. Why? Because they were lied to. And so what that guy said, as angry as he was, there was a truth to what he is revealing, not to what he's saying about January 6th. Let me give you another quote from another January 6th guy to make my point. So this is, we believe, Philip Anderson, at least that's the X account it's attached to, and he calls himself a January 6th survivor. He says, quote, telling your own supporters that the election was stolen and then not giving them a pardon or commutation after you sent them in to what you call a Fedsurrection and a trap is a betrayal. And that's right, that is right. So that goes to the central contradiction here. Because guys, you know how I ask you always think about what if the shoe was on the other foot? Let's say Bernie Sanders had won an election against Donald Trump, but Donald Trump just cheated. And we knew for a fact that he cheated. And people went not to go burn down the Capitol or to murder Bernie Sanders, vice president or whoever, right? But went to actually try to make a difference in protecting democracy. Then you would want to protect those guys, right? You wouldn't want to say, hey, they did something wrong, blah, blah, blah. If you really believed it. So does Trump and Vance, do they actually believe that the election was stolen and those guys were trying to protect democracy? Or do they think what we all know outside of that bubble, we all know the reality. They never thought it was a stolen election. They never thought those January 6th guys were defending democracy. That's why they're willing to go with the rest of the Republican establishment and say, oh yeah, the ones that did violence, they should be held accountable. But the other ones, since I promised it to my base and we've been pretending all along that the election was stolen, I'm gonna let them go. And that's the needle that they're trying to thread because of that central contradiction, the original lie, which is that the election was stolen.
Yeah, and they're obviously not needling, well enough because clearly JD Vance has gotten a lot of backlash following that Fox News interview, and now he's, attempting to defend himself on social media. So he posts on X. First of all, I donated to all the January 6th political prisoner to the January 6th political prisoner fund and got roasted for it during my Senate race. I've been defending these guys for years. Second, there were federal informants in the crowd. Do they get a pardon? I like that he's now trying to pivot to a different issue. No, we're talking about the January 6 rioters that Donald Trump campaigned on doing blanket pardons for. You came out, maybe as the trial balloon. I think you make a good point there, Cenk. And now you're getting backlash for saying maybe some of the January 6 rioters don't get pardoned. See, this is what happens when you run on campaign promises that you don't actually intend to follow through on. Now, I do not believe that all the January 6 rioters should be pardoned. I mean, those videos were horrific. People did carry out acts of violence, and there need to be consequences for that. But let me read you the rest of his tweet where he says, I assure you, we care about people unjustly locked up. Yes, that includes people provoked, and it includes people who got a garbage trial. So that's an interesting distinction. People who got provoked. Like, what do you mean by that? I mean, look, this is the thing about all these stories having to do with Donald Trump, JD Vance, and how they're going to carry out their role in this upcoming administration. I don't know what they're going to end up doing. But I do also find it fascinating that this is one of the campaign promises that they seem to want to renege on to some extent. And we're seeing the kind of backlash they're going to get if they do renege on some of those promises.
Yeah. So last two things for me on this. So now counting the campaign promises reneged on. Trump walked back that he's going to make prices lower. In fact, he said the prices might be higher if he does his tariffs. We're going to stop the Ukraine war immediately. Now he's saying, well, it's a little bit more complicated. Maybe it won't happen immediately. And now the January 6 pardons, they're doing trial balloons to see if they shouldn't do that either. And by the way, let alone the giant ones, I'm against corruption, but here, my 2 out of the 3 largest donors, Miriam Adelson, you get foreign policy, Elon Musk, you get domestic policy. So where's draining the swamp? But I mean, to be fair to him, he kind of dropped that for a while because he's so obviously personally and systemically corrupt. But so that's a lot of broken campaign promises. And whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, what does that tell you? It tells you standard politician, okay? And then finally, so on this January 6 backpedal, the whole thing about the FBI did it drives me crazy because of how irrational it is. So the deep state and the FBI wanted Joe Biden to win. So when Joe Biden wins, they egg people on to invade the Capitol so that it could delay the proceedings, so it could go back to the states where the Republicans and Donald Trump would have an advantage. Why would they do that? If they rigged the election, the last thing they would want is people rioting against the results of the election. It's so deeply irrational. And then JD Vance is obviously lying about what about the FBI people, blah, blah, blah. Where are they, brother? For all this thing about how it's Antifa and terrorists and the FBI, you've got no one in that category. No one. Because you're making it up.
Thanks for watching the Young Turks. We really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.